Now let me say something about our speaker today, Baharieh Rouhani Ma. She's originally from Shiraz. She was the chairman of the student council at her all-girls high school in Shiraz. And when that ended, when she graduated, she then went pioneering during the last years of the 10-year crusade to Nairobi, Kenya. There, she married Manouchehr Ma, and before their daughter was born, he suddenly passed away. She then continued at her pioneering post, studying in the Department of Religion and Philosophy at the University College Nairobi. Then later, she was invited to join the staff at the Bahá'í World Centre, where she served from 1971 to August of 2009. She was often a secretary aide to a member of the House of Justice. I do think I've seen letters signed by her, actually, on behalf of the Department of the Secretariat. She currently is living in Washington, D.C. She's published numerous books in English and Persian, and perhaps the one that you all have seen the most is The Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees, which is a series of biographies of members of the household of the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh, the female members of the household. Her daughter, Soveda, also lives in Washington, D.C., and she has a granddaughter as well. She has also been interviewed on A Bahá'í Perspective, and you can listen to that interview sometime if you want to know more. So that is my quick introduction to one of my favorite people, really, that I've had the chance to meet occasionally. And we will now turn the program over to Baharieh for her to give us her presentation. Thank you so much, Baharieh, for joining us today, and we're very grateful for your participation, and we look forward to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Rao. You're always gracious in your introduction. Well, as you can see, the topic is the changing role of women during Abdul-Bahā's ministry, and it has two distinct but interrelated parts. First, let me say a few words about Abdul-Bahá and why this topic is important to the Bahá'í world to study and learn more about. Abdul-Bahá was 9 years old when he accompanied his father and the rest of the family into exile, which continued for 58 years. He was 67 years old when he was free and could travel and do the other things that were so important in life, like meeting Baha'is in their countries in the West. As far as I know, he never traveled to the East, even though he wanted, but he passed away before he could go to China and India, which he loved to go to. Abdul-Bahā's main goal in life, no matter where he lived, was to serve Baha'u'lláh and his cause. As the successor of Baha'u'lláh and the center of his covenant and interpreter of his writings, one of the most arduous achievements of his ministry was educating the diverse members of the Baha'i community to overcome their prejudices against women. I will explain later why I think it was such an arduous task. This overcoming of prejudices played a very big role in all the communities, the prejudices, I mean, that unless they overcame that prejudice, they could not really set on the way to having unity. For countless of centuries, women had lived as men's subordinates. Male superiority was regarded an established fact. Dealing with a deeply rooted practice, vehemently upheld for so long, could not be achieved without first preparing the ground. The founders of previous religious dispensations had tried to improve the status of women. However, whatever improvement they effected gradually eroded until the status of women became the same or worse than what it was before the dispensation of every subsequent manifestation of God. This was despite the fact that the first book of Genesis had stipulated that male and female were created in the likeness and image of God, and both had been told to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. In Abdul-Bahá's writings and utterances, we see three main causes contributing to the degradation of women's status. These are the three: men's bodily strength, misinterpretation of scripture, denial of education to women. About the physical force, Abdulbaha says, the distinction between male and female is an exigency of the physical world and had no connection with the spirit. In former ages, men enjoyed ascendancy over women because bodily might reigned supreme and the spirit was subject to its domination, to its dominion. Abdul-Bahá imparts the glad tidings that in this radiant age, since the power of the spirit had transcended that of the body and assumed its ascendancy, authority and dominion over the human world, this physical distinction had ceased to be of consequence. And as the sway and influence of the spirit have become apparent, women have come to be the full equals of men. Today, therefore, there is no respect or circumstance in which a person's sex provided grounds for exercise of either discrimination or favor. But thank God for that bounty that this age enjoys. The second cause is misinterpretation of scripture. The assumption of ascendancy based on physical distinction was reinforced by the belief that God had sanctioned it. Such belief ensured its perpetuity. The story of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the forbidden tree is a good case in point. Abdul-Bahá says, if the outward about the story of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the forbidden tree, he says, if the outward meaning of this account were to be attributed to a wise man, all men of wisdom would assuredly deny it. arguing that such a scheme and arrangement could not possibly have proceeded from such a person. The account of Adam and Eve, their eating from the tree and their expulsion from paradise, are therefore symbols and divine mysteries. They have all embracing meanings and marvelous interpretations. But only the inmates of the divine mysteries and the well-favored of the all-sufficing Lord are aware of the true significance of these symbols. The problem was that the people who were not qualified to interpret the story went ahead and did it. In the process, they caused women thousands of years of sufferings. The third is denial of education to women. The scheme of keeping women down and backward included denying them the right to education. This was the most effective tool in the arsenal used against women. Abdulbaha says, the sex distinction which exists in the human world is due to the lack of education for women, who has been denied equal opportunity for development and advancement. Equality of the sexes will be established in proportion to the increased opportunities afforded women in this age. For man and woman are equally the recipients of powers and endowments from God, the Creator. God has not ordained distinction between them in his consummate purpose. Now, it's important to know what was the status of women when the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh declared their missions. To understand the enormity of Abdul-Bahā's efforts to remove obstacles and implement the principle of sexual equality, it is important to know how women were treated at the time the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh revealed their missions. Much has been said and written about the way women were treated in the 19th century. Let's see what Abdulbaha and Shoghi effendi say. Abdulbaha says in some countries, man went so far as to believe and teach that woman belonged to a sphere lower than human. He identifies some of these countries. He says, formerly in India, Persia, and throughout the Orient, she was not considered a human being. Certain Arab tribes counted their women in with the livestock. In their language, the noun for woman also meant donkey. That is, the same name applied to both, and a man's wealth was accounted by the number of these beasts of burden he possessed. The worst insult one could hurl at a man was to cry out, thou woman. And Shoghi effendi says, the ulamas of Karbala relegated women to a rank littered little higher than animals and denied them even the possession of a soul. The reason the status of women reached that low level was the role that religious leaders played in perpetuating the inequality of the sexes. The scheme of keeping women backward The scheme of keeping women backward had the backing of religious leaders. They were the sole interpreters of scripture. Lack of education prevented women from knowing their rights, from detecting unjust rules, and demanding justice when it was denied. The next slide is about, let me see, those certain things that get in the way of seeing everything on the screen. And okay, unlike Persian, this is about the role of language in solidifying men's domination over women. These are my words, of course. It says, unlike Persian, one of the two languages of revelation in the Baha'i faith, most languages are gender specific. English is one of them. These languages contain biases in favor of men. Okay, restoring to women their usurped rights. Baha'u'lláh, one of Baha'u'llah's main principles is the equality of men and women. He says, praised be God, the pen of the Most High lifted distinctions from between his servants and handmaidens, and through his consummate favors and all-encompassing mercy had conferred upon all a station and rank of the same plane. He had broken the back of vain imaginings with the sword of utterance and had obliterated the perils of idle fancies through the pervasive power of his might. Baha'u'lláh, in effect, refers to what had been done to women in the past on the basis of male superiority as vain imaginings and idle fancies. Now we move to the time of Abdul-Bahá and what he achieved in regard to women and their equality with men. One of the welcome consequences of the spread of the faith westward during the ministry of Abdul-Bahá was interaction between Eastern and Western believers. That interaction played a decisive role in hastening the process of implementing the principle of gender equality. One of the questions discussed in the West during the visit of some male Baha'is from the East was the organization of the work of the newly established community. bringing to the fore the intent of the law about membership of the houses of justice. The understanding palatable to the male believers did not sit well with the women who turned to Abdul-Bahá for guidance. Had the early Western Baha'i women succumbed to accepting the prevailing notion, change would have taken decades longer to take effect. The women believers begged Abdul-Bahá for his infallible guidance concerning what the principle of equality of men and women entailed. He addressed the issue with supreme wisdom and patience. His arduous task was to convince the men that what they had up to then enjoyed was no longer admissible, that embracing equality was the spirit of the age. He reaffirmed that in the sight of Bahá, women are accounted the same as men, and God had created all humankind in his own image. What the first chapter of Genesis says. God had created all humankind in his own image and after his own likeness. That is, men and women alike are the revealers of his names and attributes. And from the spiritual viewpoint, there is no difference between them. The House of Justice, however, he says, according to the explicit text of the law of God, is confined to men. This for a wisdom of the Lord God's, which will ere long be made manifest, as clearly as the sun at high noon. You notice here, Abdul-Bahá refers to the House of Justice. Does not stipulate which House of Justice. So the women receive that tablet, but don't give up. And they ask Abdul-Bahá to tell them the reason for being excluded from the membership of the House of Justice. The next tablet that Abdul-Bahá reveals in honor of the women who were insisting, basically Quran through, I believe there were others as well. The next tablet that he reveals actually says something that men find kind of hurtful. Abdul-Bahá says, in the sight of Bahá, women are accounted the same as men, and God had created all humankind in his image and after his own likeness. That is, men and men. Excuse me, I'm trying to see if it's the same that I have already read. I think it is. Okay. The next thing is that Abdul-Bahá reveals a tablet or maybe it's the same tablet, in which he says that women had excelled the men in teaching the cause of God. And men who read that tablet or came to be aware of the contents wrote to Abdul-Bahá and complained how it was that women had excelled the men. Abdul-Bahá revealed a tablet saying it may be that letters addressed to the women believers do indeed contain certain passages written by way of encouragement. But the purpose of such passages is to show that in this new age, some of the women have outshone some of the men, not that all women have excelled all men. And then he continues, the members of the spiritual assembly should do all they can to provide encouragement to the women believers. In this dispensation, one should not think in terms of men and women. All are under the shadow of the word of God, and as they strive the more diligently, so shall their reward be the greater, be they men or women or the frailest of people. The North American women continued to excel in diffusing the light of Baha'u'llah's teachings. At the same time, they kept at asking Abdulbaha to reveal to them the wisdom and the reason for their exclusion from membership of the House of Justice. Abdulbaha allowed sufficient time for the women to prove their worth, also for the men to realize that women were truly their equals. He then explained the intent of the law, clarifying that women were excluded only from membership of the Universal House of Justice. And this is the text. He says, according to the ordinances of the faith of God, women are the equals of men in all rights, save only that of membership of the Universal House of Justice. For as had been stated in the text of the book, both the head and the members of the House of Justice are men. So finally, the intent of the law is explained, and men and women both accept what Abdul-Bahá's interpretation is of what Baha'u'llah had revealed in the Kitab Aqdas. Now, this statement of Abdul-Bahá that women are only excluded from the membership of the Universal House of Justice means that they are actually eligible for election to the Supreme Tribunal. Abdul-Bahá explains the manner of the election of the Supreme Tribunal. He says, the national assemblies of each country and nation, that is to say, parliaments, should elect 2 or 3 persons who are the choices of that nation. You see, Abdul-Bahá completely avoids the use of the word men. Having said that, I must warn you that you will see some of the old translations of the tablet of Abdul-Bahá in which he explains the manner of election of the Supreme Tribunal has an additional word, and that is the word men. It says, that is to say, parliaments should elect 2 or 3 persons who are the choicest men of that nation. Please take note, men is not there. And the Universal House of Justice approved correcting the old translation, which reads as I have put up on this slide. Okay, that is for the women in the West who received Abdulbaha's approval of their eligibility for election to the elected institutions, to the local and national houses of justice in the United States and basically in the West. We will see how the Iranian women believers gained eligibility for election. The women's situation in Iran and other Islamic countries delayed the full implementation of the principle of gender equality in those countries. It took the women believers several decades longer before they were made eligible for election to local and national Baha'i institutions. When the Iranian Baha'i women pressed for that right during Abdul-Baha's ministry, he revealed a tablet which exposes the elements at play. He exhorts the women to be calm and composed so that the work will proceed with wisdom. Otherwise, he says, there will be such chaos that ye will leave everything and run away. This newly born babe is traversing in one night the path that needed 100 years to tread. In brief, ye should now engage in matters of pure spirituality and not contend with men. This is the key word, do not contend with men, because Abdul-Baha knew exactly what the mentality was, and that contending with men would have delayed the Iranian women's eligibility for election even longer. He says Abdul-Baha will tactfully take appropriate steps. Be assured, in the end, thou wilt thyself exclaim, this was indeed supreme wisdom. I appeal to you to obliterate this contention between men and women. No one can on his own achieve anything. Abdul-Baha must be well pleased and assist. Women, finally, the Baha'i women in Iran finally gained eligibility during the first year of Shoghi Effendi's 10-year global crusade. That is in 1954, women became eligible for election. Before that, they could elect, they could vote, but they could not be elected. When I was growing up in Iran, I remember those days when women were not yet eligible for election. With this, I move to the next part of this webinar, which is about the greatest holy leaf and his unique station in religious history. I thought what Shoghi Effendi has said in his tributes and in many other statements that he has made about the greatest holy leaf explains so beautifully who the greatest holy leaf was and what she achieved. So I selected one of his statements, which I have put here. He says, only future generations and pens abler than mine can and will pay a worthy tribute to the towering grandeur of her spiritual life, to the unique part she played through the tumultuous stages of Baha'i history, to the expressions of unqualified praise that have streamed from the pen of both Baha'u'lláh and Abdulbaha, the center of his covenant, though unrecorded and in the main unsuspected by the mass of her passionate admirers in East and West. The share she had in influencing the course of some of the chief events in the annals of the faith. This sentence I found phenomenal, extraordinary, and shows what she did. The share she had in influencing the course of some of the chief events in the annals of the faith. The sufferings she bore, the sacrifices she made, the rare gifts of unfailing sympathy she so strikingly displayed. These and many others stand so inextricably interwoven with the fabric of the cause itself that no future historian of the faith of Baha'u'lláh can afford to ignore or minimize. What a beautiful statement. This is the greatest holy leaf as a young woman. This is when she was older. Abdulbaha, during his ministry, made sure that the greatest holy leaf was known to the Baha'i world, and the way she had served and could serve and even deputize for him when he was away from the Baha'i World Centre. When he was ready to take a prolonged trip to Egypt, to America and Europe, the best person he could put in charge of the affairs was the greatest holy leaf. And he made that clear in a tablet he revealed as he was leaving the Holy Land for Egypt and onward to the rest of his trip. In that tablet, he says, "O thou my sister, my dear sister, divine wisdom hath decreed this temporary separation, but I long more and more to be with thee again. Patience is called for, and long suffering, and trust in God, and the seeking of his favor. Since thou art there, my mind is completely at rest." What a testimony. Since thou art there, my mind is completely at rest. Speaking of the greatest holy leaf deputizing for Abdulbaha, Shoghi effendi says, "And when the ban on Abdulbaha's confinement was lifted, he with unhesitating confidence invested his trusted and honored sister with the responsibility of attending to the multitudinous details arising out of his protracted absence from the Holy Land." Also, he says, at the time of his, that's Abdulbaha's absence in the Western world, she was his competent deputy, his representative and vicegerent, with none to equal her. Abdulbaha's absence from the Holy Land provided the opportunity for the Baha'i world to get to know much better who the greatest holy leaf was. It was that opportunity that gave them the ability to become familiar with the personality, competence, dependability, wisdom, and other rare spiritual qualities of the greatest holy leaf. Serving as the vicegerent of Abdul-Bahá during his prolonged trip set the stage for the crucial services she rendered after his ascension. Among them was taking charge of the affairs of the faith until Shoghi effendi returned to Haifa about 1 month after Abdul-Bahā's ascension. She also served as the head of a committee Shoghi effendi appointed to be in charge of the affairs of the worldwide Baha'i community during the times of his absence from the Holy Land. Shoghi effendi's tributes leave no doubt in anyone's mind about the unparalleled station of the greatest holy leaf in religious history. The greatest holy leaf was born to Baha'u'lláh and Asiya Khanum, the most exalted leaf, in 1846. That is 2 years after the Bab's declaration. She was named Fatimeh at birth, later called Baharieh. She lived to be 86 years old. She had no formal education, had little time even for private tuition. Her long, glorious life was devoted to selflessly serving the cause of her illustrious father, to helping her saintly mother, to standing firmly behind Abdul-Bahá, to staunchly supporting Shoghi effendi, to lovingly guiding members of the Holy Family, and serving the worldwide Baha'i community. Now we will go to Mount Carmel Ark, the site of the greatest holy leaf's resting place. Guided by the contents of the Tablet of Carmel, which is the charter for the development of the Bahá'í World Centre, Shoghi effendi had a clear plan as to how he was going to create an ark in the vicinity of the shrine of the Bab. When the greatest holy leaf was going through the latest stage of her life, Shoghi effendi had left instructions with Baha'is in Haifa that if she passed away during his absence, where they were to bury her. And that is the spot that you can see in this slide. The mountain is really bare. There is no development there, except for the building to the left, that if there is time, I will explain what that is. But the spot where she was buried, it's the first monument and the beginning of the development of the monument gardens. That is after the trees that he had planted around her monument had grown and the place had been developed. The greatest holy leaf had always the wish of being buried next to her mother. Shoghi effendi made that wish to come true by transferring the remains of Asiya Khanum, the greatest Holy Leaf's mother, and of her martyred brother, the purest branch, who had been offered as a ransom for the unification of the world and the quickening of its people. He removed the remains from 2 different cemeteries in Mecca and brought and buried them in the garden in the neighborhood of the same place where the greatest Holy Leaf had been buried. These are the twin monuments of Nawab, the most exalted leaf, Asiya Khanum, and of the purest branch. And as I said, the monument gardens were developed because of these monuments. When Shoghi effendi transferred the remains of Asiya Khanum and the purest branch, and the work was complete, he sent a message to the Baha'i world and also one to the United States, which says, the conjunction of the resting place of the greatest Holy Leaf with those of her brother and mother incalculably reinforces the spiritual potencies of that consecrated spot, which under the wings of the Bab's overshadowing sepulchre and in the vicinity of the future Mashriq al-Askar, which will be read on its flank, is destined to evolve into the focal center of those administrative institutions ordained by Baha'u'lláh and anticipated by Abdu'l-Bahá, and which are to function in consonance with the principles that govern the twin institutions of the guardianship and the universal house of justice. Then and then only will this momentous prophecy, which illuminates the concluding passages of the tablet of Carmel, be fulfilled. Ere long will God sail his ark upon thee, that is Carmel, and will manifest the people of Baha, who have been mentioned in the book of names. The vision of Shoghi effendi was almost complete, has been almost complete by the institutions that are around the monuments of these 3 dear souls in our faith. The first one, the International Archives, Shoghi effendi built it during his lifetime. But the other 3, the seat of the Universal House of Justice, the Center for the Study of the Text, and the International Teaching Center were built during the time of the Universal House of Justice. I should mention that when Manouchehr Khanum passed away, Shoghi effendi had her also buried in the monument gardens. As you can see here, this is the monument of Manouchehr Khanum. It is smaller, it has less columns, and it has no dome. And it is at a lower level. So as it happened according to what Shoghi effendi had envisaged. The three ladies who were most consequential in the life of Abdulbaha, her mother, her sister, and his wife, are buried in the monument garden, which is the focal center of the ark around which the international institutions of the faith are built. Before I end, I like to say something about the ark, A-R-K, meaning ship, and ark, a semicircle or rainbow shaped. It goes back to the time of Noah, when a devastating storm prompted him to build an ark which saved from annihilation those who entered it. When the flood subsided, a rainbow appeared as a sign that the earth will no longer be destroyed by flood. This is according to Genesis and Ezekiel, chapter 1, book 1, chapter 28. Rainbow is the token of the covenant which God made with Noah when he came forth from the ark. It's an indication that God will protect from destructive storms and flood those who enter his ark, A-R-K, and abide therein. Shoghi effendi has referred to the Universal House of Justice as the last refuge for a tottering civilization. As you can see, this is the seat of the Universal House of Justice, occupying the center top of the ark, which surrounds the monuments of the greatest holy leaf, of her mother, her brother, and of Manouchehr Ma, the wife of Abdulbaha. This is an acknowledgement that all images used in this presentation are from Baha'i Media Bank. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Baharieh, for these fascinating quotations and the fascinating information about the greatest holy leaf and various quotations from the master about the role of women in the faith. And several people have been saying wonderful presentations. So we have quite a few questions, both in the Q&A and in the chat. And one question is very interesting that someone asked about whether the proper name is Baharieh or Bahá'í, because it's spelled, we've seen both spellings, not only in your slideshow, but also in other places in the writings. So I was wondering if you could comment about the spelling question.
Mm-hmm. They are both correct. They are, Baha'í and Baharieh are both a feminine form of Baha, of Bahi. And her seal, the greatest holy leaf had a seal when she sealed her letters, which was also her ring. It reads Baharieh. And in the East, especially among the Iranians, she is known as Baharieh. And as a sign of respect to her, they do not name their daughters Baharieh. Baharieh is, I think, probably maybe more informal. It's used as a common name. And to make it easier for the friends in the West to pronounce it, I believe Shoghi effendi used Baharieh very often.
And Baharieh is used by Persians to name their daughters too.
That's right. Yes, yeah. But not Baharieh, yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. Someone else asks about the relationship between the Universal House of Justice and the Supreme Tribunal, whether you have any further information about that and where we can find information about women being elected to the Supreme Tribunal.
There is a lot of information about the Supreme Tribunal. In the far future, I believe Shoghi effendi has said it will become an aspect or it will merge somehow. We cannot visualize the future Baha'i World Commonwealth. We know there are a lot of developments that will take place between now and then. About the manner of election of the Supreme Tribunal, what I have is the same tablet of Abdulbaha that you find in the selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Bahá. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the part that talks about how it's elected, innocently, the translator added the word men for clarity.
Mm-hmm.
But Abdulbaha doesn't use the word men. He says persons. In Persian or Arabic, it says ashkhas, not rijal.
Mm-hmm.
So when the question was asked about the accuracy of the translation, it was checked, and at the order of the Universal House of Justice, thoroughly checked, and they agreed that the word men does not exist in Abdul-Baha's statement. So the translation which says the choices of that nation is all inclusive and the correct one.
Very interesting. That's marvelous. I think some of these other comments are not something we have to deal with. People were talking about how there was sound in the background, but I'm not sure where that was coming from, and everybody else's microphones were muted anyway. I was quite interested in the various passages that you quoted of Abdu'l-Bahá to the Western women, and the one you quoted about when Abdu'l-Bahá says that if the tablets to women, if they say that women have exceeded men, it means that some women have exceeded some men. And that tablet, I think, was revealed to Thornton Chase because he was concerned about this. The men in the Chicago community, who are mostly businessmen, and therefore they felt quite confident that they knew how to run things, were not so confident of the ability of the women to run things, because the women, after all, in those days were mostly homemakers and generally didn't have very many opportunities to organize things. And Corinne True particularly tended to take off and run with the ball, as they say, in ways that the men didn't always approve of. So that was the concern there. In fact, that first tablet about women being confined to the House of Justice and the wisdom would be as clear as the sun in the noonday sky was a tablet revealed to Corinne True. So she was not happy about that. And I don't know that we've been able to pin down exactly when that tablet was written. This is an interesting question because the translations that we have, there were several translations because I think she didn't like the translation. So she kept asking other people to translate it. And the translations seem to date from different times. And it's hard to tell whether the earliest translation that we have is actually the first one that she got too. So really quite an interesting situation. Do you think that the American women who went to Iran, what role do you feel they played in the improvement of attitudes of men towards women in Iran? Do you have any sense of that, Mrs. Sharp and Dr. Moody and Dr. Clark and Lillian Capes and such?
I think they were instrumental. They made the women in Iran, in Tehran at least, because they all went to Tehran and lived there. They made them aware of their rights. And obviously they told them how the women in the United States had gained this recognition and eligibility, and encouraged the women in Tehran to actually stand up and, in a way, ask for their rights. And that is what gave them the courage to really keep at it and men were not going to give in. That's why Abdulbaha refers to this contention between men and women and pleads with women not to contend with men, because it would have really delayed it much, much longer. They were so adamant that it was their birthright, superiority, and they were the ones for the job. So yeah, those women definitely contributed a lot. So this interaction between East and West worked both ways. The Eastern men who went to America saw how women were doing, how well women were doing. And then by American women being in Tehran, they showed how women could be capable of doing, providing healthcare, education, and other things. So it was one of brilliant ideas of Abdul-Bahá of putting them in touch with each other and then giving them time to work and to prove that women could really do it.
Yeah. And I gather that the American women suffered quite a lot.
In Iran,
the Iranian men were not very tolerant of them.
That's right.
And we have to really give them great respect and honor for sacrificing the way they sacrificed to learn Persian and go to such a very different society, to a community that was persecuted, and try to uphold Abdu'l-Bahā's standards, both the standards for the women to be kind to the men and the standards of equality. I see Margaret has raised her hand, but Margaret, please type your question in the Q&A or in the chat. We generally don't turn on people's cameras and microphones, and it just gets too complicated to try and find someone and to do that. So if you have a particular question, please pose it that way. She doesn't say, she says she doesn't actually have a question. The women, you went from, in a sense, from say 1910, when Abdu'l-Bahá wrote, I don't know exactly the date of that tablet Abdu'l-Bahá sent the women of Iran, telling them they couldn't travel 100 years in a day. Do you know the date of that tablet at all?
No, most tablets of in those days were not dated.
Yeah.
But it was after, I think, these women had established themselves in Iran, the American women. So it may have been definitely probably after 1910, maybe 2-3 years later.
Yeah, that makes sense. Between then and 1954, when the women are given the right to be elected, is almost 40 years or some 40 years.
Mm.
Do we have any sense of how things progressed in that period of time for the Iranian Baha'i women? Certainly, for example, literacy was a major development.
That's right. That, and also the steps that were taken to help women. For example, these women advancement meetings. Women met every week and they discussed the writings and educated themselves. And also during Reza Shah's time, he did a lot for women. He established schools for girls and ordered that women's veils be removed. And some had a very difficult time to give up the veil. And so those schools helped, because although in Tehran, there were a lot of Baha'i schools also set up in different towns. First for boys, of course, and sometimes for girls as well. And there were some women who were literate and were giving tuition to other Baha'i girls. And there was a lot done inside, within the faith, and also outside the faith, which helped a lot.
Person has just asked this interesting question. Do you think there will be a time when women can be a part of the universal house of justice? Is there anything in the writings that say that it might be in the future?
No, I have not seen anything. And the question has been asked from the Universal House of Justice. They have repeated the same thing that Abdulbaha had said. Shoghi effendi said the same thing. So unless the Universal House of Justice finds something that will announce to the Baha'i world, none of us have any clue, completely clueless.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. That's a good way of putting it. There was an incident in Tehran, I think it was in 1906. There was a Western Baha'i visiting the city, and he was invited to speak at a gathering of Baha'i men and women. I think the hostess was Tahere Khanum, who was a prominent Baha'i, not Tahere, of course, who was from the Bab. Tahere was a prominent Tehran Baha'i and very much concerned about reform and the role of women. There's a photograph of her in the Star of the West, and her hair is just a little bit longer than mine, about the same as yours, perhaps, or perhaps even shorter. Now, for a woman around 1912, 1915, that's a statement. That's quite a statement. And I don't know. Do you know anything about her, Tahere Khanum? Is there anything you can tell us about her?
I think she also composed poetry, and she was really a kind of activist and a very active Baha'i also. And anyway, when the short encyclopedia project was in process, I think an entry was made about her. Yeah, I think a lot of information can be found in those articles that different people wrote.
That's very interesting.
It was one of them. Yeah.
That's very interesting to know. I think I have a gigantic set of pages there somewhere. I'll have to go see if I can find her.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Maybe we can get that article published at some point, because that would be really
There were a number of women actually, and then of course, excuse me. Some of the women became very prominent and became political. Yeah. And they used the teachings of the faith in an entirely different forum and made a name for themselves.
Yeah, people asked how to spell Tahere Khanum, and I guess it's T-A'', Taherih, Tahere. Khanum, of course, Khanum. The incident that I'm thinking about was this Baha'i was asked to speak about the role of women in the West to this large gathering of Baha'is, and at that time there was a curtain down the middle of the wall of the room with women on one side and men on the other side, so they could all hear the speaker and they could all chant prayers together and they could all partake in tea together, but of course the men couldn't see the women and vice versa. And then I think it was Tahere Khanum who stood up and said, we have to remove the curtain. This is the day of the equality of men and women. And so they removed the curtain, but then no one had any idea what to do because now there was no curtain. And in the end, the women all left the room. That's the first edition of the book. In the second edition of the book, they removed the reference to the women leaving the room. But But in
Well,
the
it
first
was
edition,
startling. It was startling for women. I think
absolutely.
that person was Mason Remy, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
it was. It's an account that he wrote and like published in 1908 or something.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and I think Abdulbaha also advised the women, to be wise. And this was an unwise thing that had been done by some individual who just wanted to speed up the process. And
Sure.
men definitely were not ready.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could easily see a tablet being revealed after that, an incident like that, when it clearly would have, I'm sure, upset a lot of people. And of course,
not in Iran, because they were used to it. They were wondering why they had done that. I mean, the mindset was so much in the past.
Yeah.
That, they thought it shouldn't have been that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't see any other questions right offhand, but I want to thank you very much for this marvelous presentation, and we'll be able to cut out some of these problems, these technical problems, without any difficulty. So, so the recording won't have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And really was a very exciting to hear this presentation today about both the role of women according to Abdu'l-Bahá and how it changed, and the difference between the situation in the East and the situation in the West also, and how Abdu'l-Bahá was trying to bring it together. And then, of course, the description of the greatest holy leaf. And we'll have this whole thing up on, of course, on our YouTube channel. And we'll be announcing the location in our upcoming News at a Glance once we have it up, so people will be able to find it. We'll also have it on our website. If they go to wilmatinstitute.org and click on webinars, not only can they see the upcoming webinars, but underneath that, they can see the previous webinars, and they can click on any one of them, and that will also have a link to the recording.
I see Lena Zain.
Yes, that's nice that Lena has posted a comment. So thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday, the 9th of November with Derek Smith. We also have a presentation coming up in mid-November, which is not yet completely finalized, with Mona Khademi speaking about Laura Clifford Barney. So we hope to have that up on our website quite soon. So from Wilmot Institute, I want to thank everybody for coming. Wish you all the best for the remainder of your weekend. And we're signing off now. So best wishes to everyone.